All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting and hopefully not too chilly community meeting. Just so everyone knows, this is being recorded and streamed, and we do have a code of conduct, so keep in mind whatever you say will be on the permanent record. Also, unless you are speaking, please try and keep yourself muted. So first off, we're going to have a demo by Adrian. He will be showing running Argo workflows across multiple Kubernetes clusters. We will then have release updates from Sig Beard, aka Aaron Krickenberger. We'll get SIG updates from Azure and SIG release, and then it will be time for announcements and shoutouts. So Adrian, take her away. You have about 10 minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
Looks good.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Adrian Tweel. I'm the founder and CEO of Admiralty. Admiralty is a startup based in Seattle, and we focus on everything multi-cluster Kubernetes, try to simplify and optimize multi-cloud stacks that are built on top of Kubernetes. So far, we've published 3 open source projects. Multi-cluster controller, it extends controller runtime to make it possible to watch and reconcile resources across clusters. There's multi-cluster service account that makes it possible to import and auto-mount remote service accounts into pods so that they can call the Kubernetes API of a different cluster. There's also a library to help load those secrets and create client Go configurations from them. And finally, there's multi-cluster scheduler, and that's what I'm going to use today. And it actually uses the 2 previous ones. And so that is a kind of a, if you want, a federation at the pod level. With pod annotations, you can schedule a pod to a different cluster, or let the multi-cluster schedule decide which cluster to schedule a pod on. And so I'm going to demo it today with Argo. So this is a use case or an application example of multi-cluster scheduler. And if some of you don't know Argo, it's a workflow engine that is Kubernetes native. There is a workflow CRD and a controller that orchestrates pods based on the specification of the workflow or the manifest of the workflows. Then built on top of that, the Argo community has come up with continuous delivery, continuous integration, and eventing systems. It was started by Applatix, and which was acquired by Intuit, and they led this development at the moment. So as I said, the goals of multi-cluster scheduling are both to simplify and optimize. So we want to simplify workflows, or in general workloads that would require to run some steps in some regions or some clouds, because the data is fragmented, and so you want to extract it from different places, or you need to call some managed services that only exist in some clouds. And optimization, if you run several clusters, you can't really take advantage of efficient bin packing between them. So having multi-cluster scheduler allows you to utilize the base capacity, the cheap, bare metal or reserved instances that your other teams have in different clusters, rather than scale out with cluster autoscaler with spot instances that could be more expensive at that moment. So to picture this, like the first goal of simplifying, imagine a workflow with some like a blue step and a red step, and a blue cluster and a red cluster. So the idea is that we want blue pod to run blue cluster and red pod to run red cluster, but the workflow is defined in one cluster, the blue one. So what you would do with the current system, you would probably just run the 2 steps in the blue cluster, and you would deploy some kind of other, like with some custom code, a pod in a different cluster, or you would call a service there. Well, with multi-cluster scheduler, you can just tell the system to deploy your step in the other cluster. optimizing, imagine that in the cluster there is some available capacity, but there's not enough to run all the parallel steps I want to run at the same time. So what can I do? I can scale out, but that might cost money more than using capacity that is available in a different cluster at that same moment. And so that's what multi-cluster scheduler allows you to do too. All right, so start with a live demo. Before the demo, to go a little faster, I already provisioned 2 clusters with GKE. I renamed their kubeconfig to cluster 1 and cluster 2. I installed the different controllers and admission controllers that compose a multi-cluster service account, a multi-cluster scheduler. Multi-cluster scheduler has a scheduler in cluster 1, and the agents are deployed in two clusters. And finally, I've installed Argo in cluster 1, which is the cluster that I use to interact with my system. But it could be, we could have a symmetrical view of the system with somebody using Argo in cluster 2 and utilizing my cluster as well. So I'm going to escape and switch to the terminal. So to go a little faster, I'm going to copy paste some commands. I hope you guys are okay with that. Here are my clusters. They're both running good. And my context. And then I use aliases, K1 for kube control context cluster 1 and K2 for the cluster 2 version. All right, so let's have a look at a workflow, an Argo workflow. So workflow is the CRD, and so what you define in its spec is some templates. So there are step templates and container templates. And so step templates is here is the single cluster parallel, and that's the entry point of our workflow, and it defines 10 steps which should be run in parallel, and there use the pod spec sleep, and that's just a busy box that sleeps 10 seconds. It's a very simple model, and here's the request. And so I can run this. So as you can see, only 3 steps are able to run at the same concurrently, because there is not enough resources available in cluster 1 to run everything. This is going to take a while, maybe a minute. So I'm going to show you how I just simply add this pod annotation in the pod spec of this workflow with multi-cluster admiralty elect. It's an empty string because it's just basically just a switch. Is the annotation there or not? And so if the annotation is on the pod spec, then the multi-cluster scheduler's admission controller will know to do its job and transform this pod into a proxy. And then the rest of the system will actually create what I call a delegate pod, which does the actual job in a different cluster, or the same one, depending on where resources are available. Yeah, so it's almost done. Yeah, it took more than a minute. So now let's run the multi-cluster version. As you can see, so all containers are created at the same time. In this example, that's because the proxy pods don't have resource requests, or I could make them very little. A proxy pod does nothing; it just waits to be killed. And so, but at the same time, the delegate pods are created either in cluster 1 or cluster 2, and because there is more available resources over both clusters, the job can be done faster. 30 seconds, done. So let's have a look at the the pods. So yeah, there's a bunch of Nginx pods that I had just to create some like some use of the cluster as a model. The single cluster, 10 steps were run in the same cluster, and then here are the proxy pods, 10, but only 3 actual delegate pods ran in this cluster, whereas and actually a lot of them ran in cluster 2, because that made more sense.
You've got one more minute. One more minute.
All right. So that concludes the live demo part of this presentation, and I can have a quick animation to show you what happened. So the user, or in this case the workflow controller, created a pod. Because it was annotated, it was transformed into a proxy pod. Then in the scheduler cluster, which in this case is the same as cluster 1, a pod observation was created. The agent of multi-cluster scheduler created the pod observation in the other cluster. The scheduler does its scheduling job and decides where to put the pod. And then the agent in the other cluster does sees that decision and creates the delegate pod. That delegate pod is observed as well. And so a pod observation is created so that the feedback controller can later, when the pod has done its job, update the proxy pod to tell Argo that the step has completed. Yeah, and here's the roadmap of multi-cluster scheduler. It's the beginning. There's still a lot to do. I want to test some more integrations that will require more features and some advanced scaling and some like finer tuned RBAC and all other features. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have questions to answer on here. Make sure that the slides are linked in the community agenda, because I imagine a lot of people are going to want to look at those. It was an awesome demo. Thank you.
I'll do that. Thank you. And all the references will be in the slides too. Thank you all.
All right. Next up, we have Aaron Krickenberger, our 114 release lead, to give us some release updates. Aaron, I think I saw you on there.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Pretty good. You're going to probably want to keep the mic close to your mouth, though.
Okay, new headphones, who dis? Hi, I'm Aaron of Sigbeard. I am your 114 release lead. Today's cat t-shirt is the fine burrito, because I'm feeling rather hungry and I love things in layers. So, this is week 4. We had enhancements freeze come and go, and it was great, if a little bumpy. And then everybody got really confused about what enhancements freeze really meant. And then we kind of realized the docs maybe weren't super well linked. And then we realized there are like 2 different ways of doing enhancements free. Then we realized like exception requests maybe don't necessarily apply to docs. So I'm going to share my screen and walk us through a little bit of where we are at today. Let's see, there's that. Okay, so if you ever want to see like how the release team functions, I always link this at the top of our update here. We are at week 4, which will always take you to the schedule to tell you where we are at right now, and you can see the rest of the schedule. But just to give you the brief update, we passed the enhancement freeze, so the next milestone ahead of us is KEPS implementable Monday, February 4th. I'll talk more about that. The milestone after that would be the next milestone I think I want to tell you about is burn down. So burn down is when we start to sort of pick up the pace of meetings and collaboration. And we start to talk about eliminating bugs, focusing on stability, things of that nature. Burn down, coincidentally, is about a week before code freeze starts, because remember, we got rid of code slush. So burn down's really when we're going to be brainstorming the best and most effective memes to share with the community to let them know that code freeze is coming. I feel like we could do better than brace yourself. Think harder. In terms of builds, we cut 114 Alpha 2 this week. Here's the issue if you want to see how that went, and links to go get the things. We're going to cut the next alpha in 2 weeks from when we cut this one. So Tuesday, February 12th. Tuesday, I can type. In terms of enhancements, so enhancements freeze was Tuesday. The documents for enhancements freeze talk about that. Well, they now say that every enhancement that lands must have an associated tracking issue in the 114 milestone, and it must have an associated KEP that is merged or in progress. Because what we decided is, as everybody got kind of confused on what KEPs are and how do we use them, that will take an extra week to try and get KEPs to implementable status by Monday, February 4th. So of the KEPs that we have right now, that did get KEPs merged with implementable status, which means everybody's agreed, yes, this looks good. Yes, it's got a test plan. Yes, it has graduation criteria. Go forth and code, and we shall evaluate against it later. 8 of these things are planning to land as alpha. 8 are planning to land as beta. 9 are planning to land as stable. That makes for 25 total enhancements. That's cool. More stable than not. And then Monday, the 4th, will be Son of Enhancements Freeze Part 2, First Blood. This time it's serious. And so this time we also would have accepted bring out your KEPs, the Monty Python thing, but somehow I felt like lumping. Anyway, so there are 11 KEPs that supposedly need to get to implementable by Monday. We really appreciate your patience, and those of you who've come out to Slack to talk about this, those of you who've asked for clarifications. Stephen Augustus, who is the chair for SIG PM, the SIG that owns the KEP process in general, sent out a great clarifying email, I think. But even still, maybe the email is still confusing some people. If you get your KEP merged and to implementable by Monday, that's great. If not, you're going to have to file an exception request. A lot of people are just erring on the side of caution and filing exception requests anyway. They're great. What are they? How do they even work? I don't know. Just try and be a human being and let us know that, hey, I was trying to get this by enhancements freeze, and here's a KEP, and we'll work with you on that. Exception requests are going to become a lot more tightly reviewed as we get closer to code freeze, as are your KEPs, as are the test plans and graduation criteria in there. In terms of CI signal, so Maria's putting out a CI signal report on this Google Doc. We've had a couple things resolved. We've had a couple things that are failing that are in flight, and a couple issues that are unfortunately still not quite responded to. So just trying to reach out to the appropriate folks there. Maria, the CI signal lead, looks at a couple dashboards. She looks at the release master blocking dashboard and the release master upgrade dashboard. So there's a lot of purple, which means flaky. There's a lot of green, which means all pass. And there is some red, which makes me a little sad. The upgrade dashboard, maybe a little less happy. By the way, part of the dashboard, the COPS AWS job failing continuously is the thing we are aware of. It's also failing on pull requests. So you may have seen an email from Ben Elder sent to Kubernetes dev letting everybody know that the pull request job is now optional and non-blocking. Optional meaning it doesn't get triggered for literally every pull request. Non-blocking means that even if it fails, it's not going to block your PR. If for some reason it does seem like it's blocking your PR, you might be able to use a /skip command to work around that. So see this email, come ask questions in SIG testing if you have any questions about how that's working. And finally, still working on trying to assign job owners to the various jobs that are release blocking. We're going to express job ownership in the form of an email address that test grid can send an email to when the job fails more than n times in a row. There are some SIGs that already do this. SIG cluster lifecycle is a great SIG that does this. SIG storage is a great SIG that does this. SIG networking also does this. So I have a PR in flight where we're basically looking at some jobs that end up running all of the tests for all of the SIGs are going to be owned by SIG release under the purview of the CI signal team. We will go triage and find the appropriate SIG to take care of the test. Some jobs are clearly in the purview of specific SIGs, like the node job is probably owned by SIG node. The COPS job, since COPS is a SIG cluster lifecycle subproject, it's probably a SIG cluster lifecycle job. And so we're going to be reaching out to these individual SIGs about what email address is most appropriate, who should be on that email address, and let's make sure we start using that going forward. So look for more info about that next week. I hope it's not too loud and noisy in here and y'all heard at least some of that. Do you have any questions?
I believe George has a question. George.
Sorry, mute button got stuck. Hey, we only have 2 SIG updates. Would it make sense for us, sorry to like call an audible, to just have a quick session on anybody have any questions about their KEPs? Because I see a lot of exception reports and it feels like this is one of the meetings where all the right people are in the room. Or is there like a dedicated meeting for this?
I don't know that there's a dedicated meeting. I'm super happy to field any questions. But like I said, the TLDR is like, get your KEP merged and its status is implementable, which means all of the reviewers and approvers on that KEP have agreed, yeah, that looks good, go forth and code.
Yeah.
Claire's going to sweep through and look for things that may have been kicked out of the milestone because they didn't have a KEP, and we can add that back in. If you've already gone ahead and filed an exception request, and your reason for the exception request is we didn't have a KEP, and we do now, please look at it. Or our KEP was so close, but it didn't quite get merged, but it is merged now. Could you please look at it? We're going to be super lenient about this and human beings about this up until Monday. But beyond that, it's going to start to be a little bit more of a subjective gut feel call, which is kind of what this has always been. As much as I would like to have the explicit criteria listed, when I put out a feeler to previous release leads about like, so how do you actually handle this? Shrug?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, since this is the first time we're doing this, that people on this call don't feel trapped. Like we can help you, like we can mention it and get you on the right track if you're not, I guess.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Like, I do want to send a huge thanks to everybody who's like stepped up and helped out. I think everybody has generally probably good to set up a call Monday about the exceptions. So we can definitely talk about exceptions in depth at the release team meeting, right, which is regularly scheduled on Mondays, and you can come ping the SIG release channel about this.
Okay, so let's just add that to the notes then. If you're having questions about your exception process, this is the meeting to show up to. Sound good, everyone? All right. Sorry to interrupt.
You weren't interrupting. You asked for questions. Are there any other questions for our 114 release lead? Are any of the patch release managers on to speak about any patch releases?
For 113, we are hoping to have a patch release tomorrow. So if you have anything that you are targeting for that, please make sure it is merged today so we get CI visibility on it.
Awesome. If there is nobody else, we will move on to SIG updates. First up, we have SIG Azure. Dave, I think you are up now.
All right, let me just share my screen out here.
Looks good.
All right, so quick update on SIG Azure. So some things we did last cycle. Last cycle is really focused on adding some additional new disk feature types to Azure. So things from like Ultra SSD, Standard SSD, and premium files. We also focused on implementing Azure availability zones and cross-resource group nodes. That moved from alpha to beta in 113. A lot of the bug fixes that we were focused on, I would think the biggest ones were things around attach and detach for the disk. There's also some updates to how the Azure manages its instance metadata and adding caches there. So plans for upcoming cycles, out of tree cloud provider for Azure, target for that was alpha. A lot of that's been, a lot of tests have been completed for that. There's also been a KEP merged for that. The cluster API implementation, this actually came, Platform 9 did a lot of work on the cluster API provider for Azure, and that's actually moved over into a Kubernetes repo, and target for that is alpha. Cluster autoscaler for Azure, we're targeting GA for that. Also CSI drivers for Azure Disk and Files. There's been a new repo created for that, and that's targeting alpha. VMSS, these were more enhancements, and these ones will probably maybe delayed due to internal API issues in Azure. We'll see where those land though. Cross-resource group node support, that will be moved into beta, and availability zone support will also be beta. Availability zone support was kind of dependent on VMSS, which I said went GA previously. So availability zones, there will be more work done on that. Related KEPs, really for any of the, most of the SIG Azure KEPs, you can find those either under the SIG Azure repo on the KEPs or the cloud provider. So how can users contribute to SIG Azure? One thing that we need to do better that we really haven't done is labeling stuff with good first issues. So we'll be working on that to make sure some of those issues get labeled with that good first issue. SIG Azure Slack, we're very active in that group. We have internal upstream engineers that hang out in there. So always in a pretty active group there. There's also a group for the cluster API, and still a lot of work that needs to be done in cluster API for Azure. So where to find us? So for our chairs, myself and Stephen Augustus are chairs for SIG Azure, and our Slack channel and list, we're mostly active in the Slack channel. And that is all I got for today.
Awesome. Any questions for SIG Azure before we move on? Once, twice. All right. Thank you, Dave. You can stop sharing. The next SIG that we have up for updates is SIG release. And I believe Tim Pepper will be presenting on that. So Tim, you're up.
Yes, let me just start my share. And go into presenting also, I suppose. All right, so this is the SIG release update for the quarter. So things we did last cycle, we actually had our first presentation like this last time around. So that's actually a positive. We're trying to be a little more organized and out there, visible. Related to that, we've been doing a lot, updating our documentation and organizing in an effort to get kind of more serious beyond just the given release team. But obviously last cycle we had the 113 release. We've kind of talked about the highlights of that already in this meeting, but shorter than normal cycle. Shortened code freeze continued from before. We're continuing to build shadows and team and trying to keep that sustainable and also give some longevity across releases. So it's not just a team and a team and a team and little continuity. And hopefully that's benefiting Aaron in some of the ways that he described earlier, where we're refining and building these processes and having more consistent involvement between them, or across them rather. And also last cycle, we proposed the creation of the working group to discuss support topics, and that is in progress. Plans for the upcoming cycle, we are formalizing some SIG sub-projects, so again, related to kind of trying to activate on areas where we see need. The first of those is release team being well established. We want to move beyond just that point stuff each quarter and think about the bigger release engineering processes. So that's a new one that we're starting. And there's also one around licensing. There's a few others in discussion, but those are the two that I'd call out right now. And then obviously for this cycle, we have the 114 release, as Aaron's talked about, KEPs. We're not having a code slush period. Worth noting that the team has made a split between release blocking and release informing dashboards and test grid. Again, as Aaron mentioned, deflaking CI, and he mentioned the build that was just done, alpha build, trying to do more and earlier building during the release cycle, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and why that's important. How these plans affect you, KEPs. I think Aaron just talked about this as well, and we'll be talking more about it. So the release engineering subproject, I want to go a little bit more detail into this, what it is. So we sort of have a problem. I think practically everybody in the project's familiar with the status that we have in terms of dev. You have KK, there's some build stuff at feed CI. Awesome, we do this well, right? But there's also a thing called K release, and there's build things over there. And that's what we use to make the official releases. And what this means is we have a split between dev and production. And that's often a bad thing. So we have this nice cycle for feedback, basically on a commit basis, but also there's some periodic tests that run. And we get a nice feedback loop there on dev. But we do quarterly branching, and historically it had been more like monthly builds in preparation for official release artifacts. And like Aaron said, we're doing that a little more often, but still you have this split. So you end up with kind of two paths, a set of artifacts that are consumed by automation, and testing's the point, and that's good. But then we have artifacts that are consumed by our downstream users of the Kubernetes process. A lot of the creation here is manual, and testing is of the artifacts specifically generated in this flow is very minimal. Yes, it's coming from KK, it's been tested. Yes, we have test automation on the branch at a code level, but that's not necessarily the downloaded consumed artifacts. So quality feedback loop versus room for some improvement, right? In a little more detail, there's a bunch of specific things that get created, pushed out to Google storage buckets, or in the production path, out to the web, out to Yum and apt repos, container registries, that sort of stuff. So that kind of highlights that there's a difference in publication. So what we're trying to move towards is a future where dev and prod are more of a continuum. You have build, and yes, you have testing, but then there's sort of a staging aspect and a production aspect. And across that continuum, you get more consistent consumption, creation is more consistently automated, and you have the ability to do testing everywhere. Because right now, we aren't necessarily doing that, especially in the later phases of staging and publication towards production usage. The other thing that we want to be able to add in is signing in there, and then that enables some improvements around provenance on what we give to our downstream users. So help wanted, there's a lot of room for work here, and we need hands to do more here. So this is sort of the high level of what we aim to do as time goes by. The other sub-project, the major one release team, I think we've talked about that in detail. Aaron just gave it quite a bit of coverage, but two big things, literally big, KEPs and flaky tests, looking to improve on both of those. Related KEPs, again, this is just a screen cap, but a link to the email that Aaron mentioned that Stephen Augustus had sent out with the details of what folks need to do basically today, working on getting KEPs finalized for the 114 milestone. And then the other one related to release engineering, there's multiple, 3 or 4 KEPs sort of in flight around this concept of artifact generation, packaging, artifact management, publication, all of that stuff. We just had a big meeting. The YouTube recording and minutes are online for that. Working group status, working group LTS, we've talked about some previously, I think, but it's kind of in flight and happening, discussions are underway. The key actions, I would say, there's work to do a survey of users, operators, vendors, understand what they're looking for in support, what they want, and be able to evaluate that against what we do today. Because in addition to that dev prod continuum, at the end of that is support. And we don't want to be wasting resources on unnecessary support for our user base, or if we have gaps, we want to try to improve that as well. And then a part of that is API promotion and stabilization, getting more of the core towards V1 stable. How you contribute to SIG release, release engineering, obviously we have a need there. I think a lot of people in our community have experience in build, release, DevOps sorts of things, could have some very applicable skills here, or if you want to learn these things, it's an opportunity. The release team is always looking for new and experienced collaborators across all of their roles. And depending on our other sub-projects, as we try to formalize those, we'll probably have a lot more opportunity as well, but these are our key focus points initially. and our contact information as all the SIGs were in the normal places. And that is it.
Awesome update. Are there any questions for SIG release? Once, twice. All right. Then we are done with our SIG updates and up to scroll. Our announcements. I believe the first announcement is Google Summer of Code. Paris, Nikita, or Eeyore, are any of you on?
I'm on. Hey, it's
Then you're
Paris.
on.
The Google Summer of Code project suggestions and offers to mentor are due ASAP, as soon as possible. CNCF put in the application to Google for interns for all of their projects. We're trying to at least double our presence this year. A lot of our top contributors have come from this program. If your SIG does not have a Google Summer of Code intern application in, ask folks why. I think all of our SIGs have this opportunity, especially as I hear folks talking about how they need new contributors. So please take advantage of this opportunity. All of the instructions are located in the agenda, and it's super easy to go ahead and submit one and get things moving. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to me. I'm Paris on Slack, and other contact information I'll put in the agenda. Cool.
Thank you. Next announcement is register to do SIG updates, both intro and deep dive sessions in Barcelona. If you are a SIG chair, SIG lead, or high up in a SIG, KubeCon Barcelona is looking for SIGs to do intro and deep dive sessions. The deadline to register for that is February 8th. Please go to this link in the agenda, and I'll also lazy link it in the Zoom to register. After that, next up we have SIG and working group chairs and co-leads. George, you are up.
Yes, so chairs and co-leads, you should have received an email last year from Paris reminding us that we need to move to host-based keys for hosting all of your SIG meetings. And we're going back and checking, and we have not done that. And this is the one thing blocking us from publishing the public calendar back on the website, which should be extremely useful for all of us. So there's an issue there. We still have some SIGs that are not, haven't gone through this transition. And if you need help, I will walk you through it. And there's a tracking issue there for you to follow up with. Steve, I think you have a question?
If we didn't get those creds on a SIG, can we contact you for a follow-up, George? Or
yeah, just contact me, and what we'll do, we'll just do a quick audit of all your Zoom stuff, and we'll just sort you out for the rest of the year.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for George? All right, and the last and final announcement before shoutouts is the KubeCon Shanghai CFP. The deadline is February 22nd, so if you are looking to submit for Shanghai, you have a few weeks, actually almost a month, but don't wait, get it in soon.
Oh, I've got one more. Can I butt in?
I guess.
Yes. One more. Meet Our Contributors is next week. It's next Wednesday. We are moving to having 2 regular sessions again, meaning one steering committee session is not going to be included anymore. And the reason why that is a steering committee is moving to public bi-weekly meetings, meaning you can actually go and do business with the steering committee on the line. And more information will be out to Kubernetes-dev@googlegroups.com mailing list. Everybody should be on that. That's on this call right now. That's our canonical source of truth for developer and contributor information. But more info about that. But back to Meet Our Contributors. I'd love to have more folks on the call that have never been on to be mentors. Yes, if you are brand new and just landed your PR, that is also very good for others who have not landed a PR. So yes, your experience does count and matter as a mentor. Please come and see me again, Paris on Slack or parispittman@google.com. And we have a 7:30 a.m. Pacific and a 1 p.m. Pacific time for that. Thanks, y'all. Sorry.
You are all good. All right, last up, we have shout outs, and we have quite a few. So starting at the top, at Zachary Sarah would like to shout out to Ben the Elder for proactively seeking to collaborate on subdomain site design. At Neolit123, big thank you to at SpiffXP for helping drive the PR that removes tracking of placeholder references, reference docs in the KK repository. At SpiffXP, shout outs to Liggett for making me forever associate CAP with CAP. Also, SpiffXP shout outs to Steve, I'm going to butcher the name, but Steve Kuznetsov for getting PR number 11,000 into Kubernetes test infra. Wow. At Akoots, I want to shout out, I'm going to butcher it again, at Steve Kuznetsov. He always takes the time to fill in his issues on the hashtag SIG Testing Weekly Call agenda ahead of time. And with great detail and links, this makes taking notes in real time much easier when it's his issues. Thank you, Steve. At Paris wants to thank Mr. Bobby Tables for knocking out a ton of quote unquote glue work in our that's weird. It kind of cut it off. Glue work in our communication documentation to make our processes more complete and transparent in Kubernetes community communication and closing several issues around them. Thank you so much, Bob. And last but not least, at SpiffXP, shout out to Liggett for suggesting the KEP extension to release freeze and providing the language for it. And with that, is there any final business, anything anyone else wants to talk about? Because we are reaching the end. If not, you all have 18 minutes free by my clock. Thank you everyone for joining and have a wonderful Thursday. And since Aaron had to leave, happy Thursday.
Later all.